Welcome to Healing Together. I'm Nicholas Boileau. The following episode deviates from our regular health conversations, but we felt it was an important topic to cover at this time when so many relationships and marriages are strained by the logistical and economic impacts of the pandemic. Today I'm talking with Gabrielle Hartley, whose life's work is to help people navigate divorce with as much harmony and well-being as possible. Gabrielle is the author of the recently published book, Better Apart, which radically reframes the way couples experience, execute, and recover from divorce. So without further delay, my conversation with Gabrielle Hartley. I'm here with Gabrielle Hartley. Good morning.
Good morning.
And I thought we'd launch right into what's going on today. I feel like times like these reveal the cracks in our foundations. A lot of times we sweep things under the rug for months, weeks, years, and a lot of things are surfacing.
100%, because we can't hide from ourselves in the busy.
I'm wondering what you're seeing. I feel like we're going to see a whole new crop of babies or a whole new crop of divorces.
I think that you shine a light on the two ends. In the divorce arena, there's a tendency to catastrophize and minimize. And that's what's happening now with everybody talking about how there's going to be all these babies and all these divorces. And I think there's also going to be many relationships that just shift, right? They don't become terrible, they don't end and they don't, refresh back to day one. But there is a time to take the pause to notice what's working and what's not working. And then that extra time that we might not be that excited about to really get in and do some of the work because there's nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. We're here, right? So I think the instinct to go to the extremes is because both extremes are going to happen. I think there will be a bump in divorce. I think there will be a bump in babies, part of the double entendre there. But also the one thing that I'm actually concerned about is just the extent to which violence towards children may be happening and going unreported during this time. My understanding is, I'm not sure if this is nationwide or just in New York or Massachusetts, but there's something like a 40% decrease in calls to the various, DCF, CPS, the various social services, because the kids are not interfacing with their teachers or their therapists, or if they are, the parents are right there and nobody's going to disclose anything. So that's actually a bit of a worry.
And that's really interesting. When you're in a kind of lockdown situation, there's no way to get a breather. Let's say you're a person who's prone to anger. There's no way to go blow off steam with your buddies that you go fishing with, or you're a person who tends to get physical with your kids, but you've learned to take a breather by going out and doing the grocery shopping. Well, that takes a lot more logistical effort. There's a lot more time that goes into it. Do you think that's affecting people, just this forced being enclosed together?
Absolutely. And then there's the people who, they never had the coping skills and it's, they would have done this either way, but the kids would have sort of blown the whistle on the parent, like had gone into school with, a bruise on their cheek or, whatever. I think that learning to, no time like the present to learn to moderate your behavior, your actions, your ability to act, and your ability to choose whether to act or not. I have this whole divorce method about, helping yourself or helping your clients be better through divorce. And one of the things is to cultivate a patience practice. And when do we need more patience with ourselves and with the people closest to us is during, a now 2.5 month pandemic, right? And so one great thing you can do is literally take space, give yourself a timeout. If you live somewhere where you can go outside and you're allowed to take a walk, go take a walk. If you're in close quarters, if you're sitting listening to this broadcast from an apartment in an urban environment, just ask for time in a private room. If you don't normally have a private room, some families go so far as to create a schedule for use of the bedroom so that everybody gets some time to themselves. Now with the weather getting better, hopefully it's going to be easier to take space just by leaving the home for a little bit.
I notice you always mention being good to yourself and then being good to others. In one passage of your book, you talk about, I think the quote is, for you to be happy is good for everyone involved.
Absolutely. So, many of us, especially people who are inclined to read self-help books or engage in self-help programs, tend to be empaths, empathetic, and givers, right? And so we give and we give and we give, and the people around us take and take and take, and then we are left depleted, unable to give, and then we may snap. We maybe don't snap, but we feel an emptiness, we feel a hollowness. We can really give of our best selves when we are living from a place of wholeness. And so what I was seeking to do when I wrote Better Apart was to give a sense of permission to the reader that it is not only okay, but it's essential that you put yourself first in terms of be patient with yourself, be forgiving of yourself, be respectful to yourself, get clear with what you want. When you're tending to your needs, and this is not about being selfish or self-centered, it is about being whole. When you are whole, then you can extend to the world from a place of groundedness, and it's going to be more authentic when you're giving, and you're less likely to be resentful or to be, living a life of martyrdom. All too often, people exit their marriages because they're in this blame loop where, for instance, a mother of young or mid to young children might come in saying, he's always away, and when he comes home, he is going to the gym or what have you, and I'm always with the kids, and he's got his career, and what do I have? And the first question is, what are you doing about it? Like, are we just going to leave? Which in some circumstances people have done a lot of work, but sometimes people just get angry when we're complicit in our own undoing.
I notice that you tend to do as much as you can and kind of expect the world to reward you, and you kind of expect your relationship to reward you because you put out all this energy and did all this stuff. But I think it doesn't work that way.
Definitely does not work that way. I mean, if you stay at home with your kids, it's a lot of work, and it's, it can be thankless.
And you need to be your primary caretaker.
That is exactly right. And you need to take your job seriously. I'm always posting things like, care for yourself as if you were someone you loved. Like, you need to put yourself first. I personally, I didn't have the easiest time buying things for myself, or, like I'd go to other people's events and I would, give as much as I possibly could. But then when it came to me giving to me, that was something I had to learn, right? And as I learned it, I really realized that is the undoing of a lot of couples, is the failure to take care of yourself and getting stuck in the blame cycle and out of the visionary cycle. When we're stuck in blame, when we're just all externally oriented, we are unlikely to feel like we're truly rooted in our own life, and it's not a good way to feel.
I have a belief that when we were kids, we got this big reward for doing the dishes or cleaning our room, and it doesn't happen anymore now. So you did the dishes and no one thanked you. And there's this fantastic supporting argument for what you say, which is you thank yourself and go off and do something for yourself. Take a half hour to read or exercise or do a little meditation and help yourself feel better, because no one else is going to do it for you.
I don't know, maybe it's sad, but like I had a big birthday this year, and I created a Google Doc for my family of like, my birthday was during the pandemic. So all my plans were canceled. And, it was a few days before my birthday, and I was like, so do we have a plan? And like, nobody had a plan. And I was like, okay, here's a Google Doc. Now, maybe this is controlling, but it wasn't a hard document. It was like, I said, decorate the house. What does that mean? I don't know, whatever you think it means, decorate the house, make a chocolate cake. I like made a list of things I wanted. And, I just let them to it, and they did absolutely everything. And it was like the most fantastic day. And I don't think it cost a ton of money or took a tremendous amount of effort, but I felt really good. And it was, part of that was self-care. I made sure that I didn't have a disappointing day, because I knew that I would have been very angry and upset and disappointed had the day come and gone unnoticed. Now, maybe that's not something that resonates with you, but we all have things like that are important to us. And people really can't be mind readers. And so you need to let them know what you need. But before you can let them know what you need, guess who you have to know, who has to know what you need?
Yeah, yourself, of course.
And people don't know what they need. This is really true. And it's not actually true that I'm going to take that back. People know what they need, but they ignore what they need, because very often that voice has been repressed for so long, for whatever variety of reasons, because we were first pleasing our parents or pleasing our teachers or fitting in with our friends or whatever it is, according to, your whole life trajectory. And then you're pleasing your spouse or, again, your friends or your children. And then maybe you see other people around you who have, more beautiful houses or have achieved greater things or whatever set of things that are resonating for you that you wish you had. And instead of just making them actually exist for you, you might live in a state of feeling a little bit underdone, like there's more, but yet you're lacking a belief in yourself that you can do it. And so I believe that we can do whatever we truly want to do, but we need to be so clear on what it is. And we also have to be clear on, what our abilities are and where our weaknesses are, and not to be afraid to ask for assistance with things. There's so many people who can help us to, bring whatever we want to do to another level.
Yeah. So I think what you're saying is, one, be your primary caregiver. And there's some transition that needs to happen in the course of your life where you realize that you are your primary caregiver. And then two, then pay attention to those needs and actually get on it. And I think, actually what you say is you may not get to the end point that you intended. You have to be aware of what's on the menu for you. But on the other hand, I would add that if you feel you're on the journey, the end goal might matter a lot less.
That's exactly right. Because if you're getting into that negative space, you need to take a step back and see what you can get rid of, because life is too short to live in the negative.
Yeah. And it should feel like you are pursuing something that matters to you, not the thing that someone else needs you to pursue. Although, of course, you have to take care of the people around you at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not suggesting you just, go all Ayn Rand on us and become totally singularly focused. I'm just, in the context of Better Apart, I'm addressing an audience of people who are going through divorce. They may be in the midst of a very tough, painful litigation, or they may be mediating, but very often during divorce, people tend to feel full of shame and tend to second guess themselves a lot, because if not the biggest decision of their life has unraveled. So then you start second guessing all the smaller decisions. And so the whole process that the method lays out is geared toward getting clear to get you through the divorce, but then in that process, you're going to get clear for the rest of your life forward. So it's really like a roadmap forward through the lens of, you've read it, patience, respect, peace, clarity, and forgiveness.
Well, let's talk about those things, and let's also angle it towards health. When I was introduced to you by a friend, it was someone who knew that we were doing this health podcast and who felt very much like divorce is a health issue. Can you put a frame around that or color that, like how divorce and health are interrelated?
Absolutely. Divorce and health are inextricably linked. In fact, it's one of the themes. I have a blog, the Better Apart blog, and wellness is an entire category of blogs, because when you're getting divorced, your whole system is suffering, your neurological system and your whole body. I'm not a physician, but I can tell you that your digestion is going to suffer because of your anxiety, because you're upset. You're going to just generally be, here's a medical term, out of whack, right? and when that's the case, you're not going to sleep well. If you don't sleep well, you're not going to have the energy and stamina to exercise. When you don't exercise, you're not going to think as clearly. When you don't think as clearly, you're not going to produce as well. You're not going to show up as well. When you're going through a divorce, when you're so upset, what can happen is that your emotional brain co-opts your thinking brain, and the flood of emotion interrupts your otherwise laser sharp abilities to make decisions that are going to serve you. And so your health is going to be interrupted as a global impact of the entire debilitating process. Is that making sense?
Yeah, it's making a lot of sense. And do you have examples of people, like, obviously without mentioning names, but people where you've seen their health decline during the relationship troubles or prior to the divorce, and then you've seen the opposite and their health get better once they had things settled?
Absolutely. I mean, again, people come to me for divorce mediation and coaching and representation, and not for health management. But what I can see, what is visible to me, is that people lose extreme amounts of weight, which might sound like, oh, that sounds like a good thing right about now, right in the middle of the pandemic, where every other article is about how everyone's gaining weight. But it's actually, they're losing weight in a bad way because they're unable to eat. And then on the other end, I see the same people when they're feeling better again and they're bounced back to their normal weight. And so what is that about? It's not about, vanity in that case. It's because they literally cannot eat. Their appetite is suppressed due to the situational based depression at the time. Another thing is that people come in and they don't sleep. I see a lot of people who come in who are, the first couple of times I see them, they're like a totally different person than maybe a few months later. I can't count how many times I've said to people, you seem like you're doing really well. And they are almost a little taken aback. And that's because I only have a snapshot of them from when they first discovered that their life was unraveling. And then over the next few weeks when everything's gone to pot. And then, once we start making order and sense of things and we start to have strategy in place and a plan in place, then they start sleeping again or they start eating again and things go back to normal. But the thing is that it doesn't necessarily restore to normal in such a short period of time. It can be a period of years for some people. Some of that you're just going to have to deal with because we're human, and when you grieve, and there's not all that much you can do to hasten the process too much. But if you are the kind of person who's very sentimental, or you tend to live in the loop in your mind, the negative loop, it's really good to stick some processes in to interrupt the negativity and to start creating pockets of positivity to begin navigating your brain forward so that you spend less of the day living in the, steeping in that tea bag of sadness.
So what's a good negativity interrupting process?
So there's a lot of them. One that I love because, I like to write, and I've always done this, is get a journal and a pen. You could do it on your computer, but I think there's something really healing about pen to paper. It could be because of my age. And make a list of things that bring you joy. Write a list of people, places, activities, circumstances. Just write down, do it every morning when you wake up, every night before you go to sleep, as almost like a mantra, like as a personal mantra. When I say a mantra, I mean an affirmation or a positive statement, which is another thing that you can do when you find yourself going negative during the day, is to have a mantra, a statement, something positive that you get in the habit of saying throughout the day so that when you're feeling negative, that mantra or statement is accessible to you. So for instance, if you're a very reactive person, maybe you want your mantra to be, I am radiantly calm. And so when you're taking your morning walk, you just say to yourself 10 or 20 times, I am radiantly calm. I am radiantly calm. And before you go to sleep at night, while you're brushing your teeth, you remind yourself that you're radiantly calm. Maybe you write it down in a couple of places that you're going to look at on your computer screen where I live, or your bathroom mirror where you're getting ready in the morning. And then what happens is later on, when something happens that triggers you, it's not like you are suddenly transformed into this totally laid back person, but you're going to have the tools to take the step back and to say to yourself, hey, wait a minute, I thought I was radiantly calm. I am radiantly calm. There you remind yourself that you're radiantly calm. And, you might not be radiantly calm, but you might be calmer than you would have been before. And that's all about learning to respond rather than react. And that's not just to external things, but that's in terms of internal signals that we're sending ourselves. Respond to yourself. And before you get into that negative loop of everything that's going bad, start to do your breathing, start to say your mantra, and start to shift your brain. And couple that, ideally you'd couple that with the writing exercise.
Yeah, you talk a lot about writing, and I read the book last week, Better Part, and what I write at night is the time I went to bed so I can keep track of my sleep, which generally causes me more anxiety because then I write how much time I was awake and when I woke up, and then I track it.
I'm right there with you. I'm so crazy.
I get in a total anxiety loop. But the last couple nights, I opened a new page and then I started the page with just the word gratitude. And then I wrote a list, having forgotten that this was one of your recommendations in your book. Like I thought I was coming up with this myself.
That's even better.
Yeah. And the list was unbelievably long. Like I just gave myself 5 minutes and I filled up a page with all these things I'm grateful for and the names of the people I'm grateful for. And then I had the best night's sleep.
It's amazing. It's like the other thing that you can do, not to get too woo-woo, and I know this is maybe off the health point, so but I'm going to say it anyway. If there's something that you want to materialize in your life, something big, write down every detail about it before you go to bed or when you wake up in the morning, or both. Write it down, get as granular and detailed and specific as possible. And what's going to happen is it's going to start to become internalized into how you think. It's going to start to become who you are. That's there's something called the VER protocol, which is visualize, internalize, realize. So the visualizing can be done in your journal. It's so easy. The hard part is knowing what you want to visualize, right? Like, where are you getting clear? And the more you can get clear, so do this day after day and get more and more clear, what will happen is it will internalize. And then after it internalizes, it will materialize. It will be realized. Now, that doesn't mean, like we said in the beginning, it doesn't mean it's going to come out exactly how you said. It doesn't mean it's going to be as quick as you said, but it will happen because you're literally changing your thoughts. And when you're changing your thoughts, you're changing your life, right? Because what are we other than our thoughts?
I'll put my interpretation on that. We live our lives in our minds.
Yes.
So there's no place other than your mind where you're going to experience your success or your failure or your intimacy or your anger.
There's so many things that we can bring to fruition by thinking about them. You're talking about shifting perspective, which is incredibly important, but we can also make shifts to our reality, believe it or not. It might involve creating some chaos in the interim, but by visualizing what we want, let me just give you one example. So I always wanted to write a positive divorce book, like forever and ever. It's, my whole backstory. I grew up with parents who divorced well, but I didn't realize it was good until I worked in New York City for a judge. And I saw what divorce really looked like for way too many people. And so I brought together this project involving yoga, mindfulness, and divorce. And so I wanted to write this book. And then Gwyneth Paltrow got a divorce, I guess, in 2014, and she talked about consciously uncoupling. And I said, I'm going to write the book that Gwyneth Paltrow is going to endorse, and it's going to be the start of a positive divorce movement. And it's literally happened. Like, I mean, I made lists. I thought about it constantly. I didn't know Gwyneth Paltrow. Like, I was like, I'm going to get a book deal with a major book publisher. And like, I didn't know anybody. I had no skills. It's just, I had this idea and I was so focused on it. And it realized, and I've got lots of personal experiences like that. It's just, I really believe that when you are laser sharp in your vision, just saying, I want to be rich. Well, that's like a little bit vague. We want to know more. Like, what do you want to do? How are you going to do it? You do need, that's what I'm talking about when I say get granular. Specificity is key, because when you have the specificity, when you have the blueprint or the roadmap in your mind, then the universe will provide everything that you need.
Let's also note that you have to be within your universe of possibilities and have some cognitive ability to discern what's realistic and not, even if it's very ambitious.
Right. Like, I'm not going to make a rocket ship.
Right. Or become an NBA player.
Fair enough.
I'd like us to switch gears at this point and talk a little bit about forgiveness. This is something you write a lot about in your book.
There's a lot of pushback around forgiveness. When I give live workshops, I'm always a little afraid to use the F word. Maybe if I were rewriting the book, I'd call it acceptance, because I think people have an easier time with the concept of acceptance. But I'm not talking about forgiving the other person. I'm talking about forgiving yourself. And forgiving the other person, maybe not for what they did, but for their inability to see or to understand or to truly acknowledge what they did. Forgive them for all that happened and for all that didn't happen. Because when you can release your anger, when you can release your disappointment, then you are going to get back your emotional freedom, right? And if you ask me, emotional freedom is everything, or most of everything, right? Like, when you're emotionally free, your circumstances are so much less important. There's a whole world of things that can't be forgiven. However, when we feel stuck in our anger that's attached to the forgiveness, that's where we put ourselves into trouble. There's that quote, which I say far too often, and it's not mine. I don't know whose it is. It's anonymous. I've looked it up in all different platforms. It's holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. I say it all the time because it gives people such an aha moment, when you say, who's this serving? Now, a big caveat to this is that when you are grieving, anger is protective in nature, and you need to be angry for some time so that you can do the tasks of the day, right? Most of us need to have some anger to get through, but then there comes a point where you have processed enough that you can release that and start living again.
Yeah. So there's a self-protective part of anger that creates a shell, but then that shell is also self-limiting as you evolve past the moment where it was useful.
The thing is, if you start to allow yourself to let go a little bit, you may feel like you're going to crumble. And so maybe it's too soon to let go, but you might just be in the habit of feeling angry. And if you feel like you might be ready to let go a little bit, just know that you're going to be letting go of stress, and you're going to be giving yourself not just emotional freedom, but also freedom from all the negative health impacts that stress causes you. I just want to make a mention of one thing that applies to all the things that we're talking about here. And that's the notion of developing a habit. All these things sound great. And, you might today, after listening to this, decide, I'm going to go make a gratitude list. He seems to like it. She's talking about it. There's a book about it. And you make the list and you're like, that did feel good. And then that's gone. And, you go on with your life and you never make a list again. And if you do that, that's fine. But if you really want to make lasting, impactful change for yourself in your life, you need to choose practices that you can keep with you and do on a daily or twice a day basis so that they become integrated into your normal ways of being. And my suggestion is that you just pick one practice at a time. Maybe you're going to start with breathing. You're going to sit on the edge of your bed and do a couple of deep belly breaths, breathing in a mantra. And then maybe you'll do breathing and a mantra and journaling. I mean, if you try to do too much at once, the likelihood is that you're not going to be able to keep up with it and the changes won't really happen. So we want to, remember that adage, slowest is fastest, and be kind to yourself. And you'll find that your stress begins to dissipate, the clouds begin to lift, and you're going to make better decisions and feel physically better.
So we're in this moment where it's hard to get out of the house. It's hard to do the things you might do to de-stress. And let's say you're in a toxic relationship. Let's say you want to get divorced. It might really be logistically too difficult at this point. Like, a lot of people have lost their jobs. A lot of people can't get a job right now. So maybe you need a job to have your independence. And at the same time, the toxicity inside the house can get really bad. Can you talk about some of the ways people can work on, in a way, being better together, even as they can't be, to use the title of your book, better apart?
Yeah, I mean, you bring up, that's like literally the first topic that came to my mind back in March. I think I don't know if it was an article or one of my YouTube episodes called, Better Apart But Stuck Together. I mean, it's a real thing, right? And so, unfortunately, we can't control the way our other half acts and responds or reacts, but all we can do is keep our side of the fence clean. So one easy thing to do is to notice when you are being reactive and exit a senseless argument loop. So most of us have a certain set of things that we struggle with in our relationships if we have anything difficult going on. And just taking that step back to be more observant of what's happening in your life, and then choosing to literally not engage, not in a hostile way, but just in a calm, peaceful, matter-of-fact way, holding in a little bit of your every thought, which you may feel very comfortable to sort of unleash all the time. Don't do that during this time, because it probably never served you, but now it's really not going to serve you. And if you have any inclination that you might be able to make your relationship last, but normally you don't have time for therapy, now everybody's stuck at home. There are teletherapists available that you can finally maybe go and learn some better listening skills. That's something that you can do, even if it means that ultimately you're going to be separated. You might be able to separate with a little bit more peace, dignity, and grace and elegance.
Right. And there's a lot of systems theory around how systems tend to go back to homeostasis or whatever they're used to. So as you're trying to take care of yourself, it should be expected that your system won't cooperate. Your marriage, your spouse, your children, let's say you decided for your own mental health, your physical well-being, and because you're stuck in this place, you need to go for a run every day. Well, you can't expect the rest of that system to actually make room for that. And that's where we go back to being your own caregiver and making things happen for yourself, even when the rest of the world doesn't want to cooperate.
Yeah, so that's actually a really interesting theme that you raised. This happens, this maybe applies more, well, I guess it applies to both partners, but more typically you'll have, when people have young children, oftentimes the wife stereotypically stays home more, even if they're still working, but maybe they're just working part-time or they're not doing a lot of other things. They're just working a little bit, and the husband has their full career. And then, you see this, the wife, then the kids get to be a little older and maybe they're 10 and 12 years old or something like that. And the wife then suddenly gets her, career mojo back, and there's a really big shift that happens in the family system where, the husband might not like it, the kids might not like it, and the wife is angry or frustrated. But in that circumstance, the person who is changing the rules midstream needs to recognize their role and then work with the rest of the family to try to bring them up to speed, right? So that's a little bit different than the pandemic, but it's similar in that when we start caring for ourselves in any way, and we haven't done that to a certain point, we're sort of rocking the boat. And so everything has to resettle. Now, I think during the pandemic, there's a real opportunity to take better care of all of ourselves for many people because we're all spending less time commuting and we're spending less time out of the house, whether we were traveling for work or just driving locally, 20 minutes each way each day. Now that's 40 minutes that you used to get to yourself. Maybe you still need to take that time to yourself. And everybody's used to having some time alone, right? Like the kids are at school. Most of us, both people go to work or if somebody's at home, the other one's at work. I really encourage, again, create a blueprint for success, which may just be, make a Google calendar of who's in charge of what on what day, or have a conversation either weekly or daily on, when you're each getting your escape time so that you can have some sense of mental space.
Can we look at a little bit some examples of what went wrong and what went right? I bring this up because I was a pilot for 25 years and I feel I learned a lot from piloting successfully, but I probably learned the most from the back of the flying magazines where they always talked about the aircraft accidents.
Oh, God.
And they would start with what happened. And then a few months later, they would tell you the conclusions from the National Transportation Safety Board. I feel like in relationships, a lot of what goes wrong is hidden behind the walls of homes. And as people embark on this incredible journey called marriage, they don't have the advantage of the back of the magazine that shows them where things went wrong, how they went wrong, and how they can avoid them.
So I think the people who are really good at closing their case and reaching a reasonable resolution are the ones who understand that they need to be really clear, again, clarity on what they each want and need, right? And that's even true when you're staying married. That's, the first part of your question. How do some people navigate and stay together versus breaking up? When we're clear on what we want and need. And then the second thing is to listen. So the people who divorce well, they listen to what the other side wants and needs. And they also recognize that they're maybe not at the same emotional point. And so if you're maybe the person leaving and you're like in a big rush to get the divorce and the other person is shocked, whether or not you believe they should be shocked, but it happens all the time, then, you may need to give in on some things in order to move your case along a little bit more swiftly. In the ideal circumstance, you're both going to listen, and you're not going to just listen to the position. You're going to listen for the underlying emotion to the position. So, for instance, one side might say, I want the house, right? And you might know, oh, I want the house. So you think we're going to have a war because we both want the house. But actually, that's not true. Only one of you wants the house. The other one of you wants to make sure that you're going to be in a secure place for you and the kids to be, right? Like it just might be fear talking and not actually desire. So if we know what the underlying fear is about, for instance, then we can get to satisfying that fear and we can close the case. Sometimes people just need to be heard, right? Maybe we have to have a session where, you just tell the other party that you have, you feel heartbroken, and just to have a third party listen. It doesn't mean you need a judge to listen. A mediator can listen. Just having somebody there can be a big release.
So what are the best ways to get clarity? Let's say your mind is just latched on to that blame and anger and you're feeling bad. As you talked about, you have the physical and emotional symptoms of just being in a place of high stress. How in the world do you get clarity?
The better apart process begins with patience, and it begins with patience with yourself. So what does patience mean? Patience is about responding and not reacting. That's for yourself too, right? So how do you do that? You take space. How do you take space when you can't go anywhere when you're stuck at home? You take space in your mind, right? So we can start with the breathing. We can start with a positive affirmation or mantra. We can start to list, things I care about. Make that a subheading, things I care about. And then make a list of all the things that you want, things I care about at home, things I care about for my kids, things I want in my life, how I want to feel, how I want my next home to look, how I want to be spoken to. You can start to, if you have a willing participant, do a listening exercise, which is reflective listening, where you set a timer and each person gets to say how they feel for 5 or 6 minutes, and you reflect back each sentence. Just saying it and being heard can be very reparative, even if you don't have any actual outcome for your feelings. You can say, like, when you stare at your phone and I'm talking to you, I feel invisible. And then the other person would say back, when you're talking to me and I'm staring at my phone, you feel invisible. And then that person would say, is that right? And then you'd say yes. And then the other person would say, is there more? And you'd say yes or no. And, and you go through that for about 5 or 6 or 7 minutes each, take turns. That can really do a lot to clear the air. And when you have the air cleared, it doesn't mean you're making everything all better, but you're releasing emotional space so that your brain can settle and you're able to be more patient and more clear. You might not have a willing participant, and if you don't have a willing participant, that's okay too. But you need to step away from the blame game and get in your head and get clear. It would take a very long time to actually go through every step verbally here.
Well, people can read the book.
Right. But I think, the whole idea of noticing and of noticing the neutral as a pathway to peace is really, really, really incredible. It's even for yourself. Like if you're feeling anxious and wound up, if you can start making a list of, instead of things that I'm grateful for, you can write things that calm me. And if you're not a writer, make a vision board. If you've got magazines and glue and a big piece of cardboard in your house, or run over to your local, Walgreens or CVS or Amazon and make an old time vision board and, cut out things that make you feel calm. Start doing things that feed you the peace that you need. And in terms of your interpersonal dynamic with your spouse, if you're finding that you're snipping at each other, every time they do something that's even just neutral, noticing it, circling back to what you said in the beginning of our conversation, they make the bed, say, thanks for making the bed, because the other person is going to process that as slightly positive, if not neutral. So if you say 10 or 12 positives or neutral things, and then later on you have to wham them with, I wish you wouldn't such and such, you're probably going to get a little bit of a better reaction than you would if you went quiet the whole day and then just complained about something.
And you might notice that too. I think noticing is really a powerful word. And it reminds me also of your continuous refrain to pausing. One of the things you do is you start the book in a more global way by asking readers to pause. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I talk about taking a pause because maybe you don't need a divorce, right? Like maybe what you need is a recalibration. Like marriage is hard, right? And not for everybody, but for most people, it's hard. And marriage is long. And again, not for everybody, but for a lot of people. And we have to recognize that it's going to be a path that is going to have its ups and its downs. And so there are things that we can do that can let us have a little bit of a recalibration before we break. Like do everything you can within the context of the marriage before you just decide to leave. So maybe there's something that you're self-limiting and you're blaming your relationship on it. You always wanted to do such and such, but he/she won't let me. Well, why not try to do it within the context of the marriage before you end the marriage in order to do it? And I'm not suggesting you engage in negative behavior, like something that's objectively bad. Well, I've always wanted to gamble. I've always wanted to have, multiple partners. Like maybe, I'm not saying that that's objectively bad, but that typically doesn't work in sustaining a long-term marriage for most people. But in terms of, you want to do an intensive yoga, retreat that's 2 weeks long and you think your partner would never allow it. Well, why don't you ask before you decide that it's not going to be something that you can do, right? Or like maybe you're just as reactive as your spouse. You're always complaining that your spouse is reactive, but maybe you're just as reactive. Like it's about like owning your stuff. That's really what it's about. And then when you're getting clear on what's your stuff and you start changing it, again, maybe your relationship isn't destined to work out, and that's okay. Like not every relationship can work out, but if you're going to be better apart, it's best if you can do it in a way that comes from peace and calm. I think oftentimes people wait for a big fight, a big flare up, in order to end a relationship. And sometimes there is no flare up necessary, right? Like sometimes your relationship just isn't right for whatever set of reasons. And, it's really hard to leave when things are good enough. But if you're inclined to leave and you're just waiting for the moment, I don't necessarily think that's the best idea, because it's almost like artificially creating a reason. And then it's creating this like negative narrative that your whole family is going to move forward with. So, I would just take pause, and deciding whether to stay or to go is not in my wheelhouse, but how to leave is something that I think that we have tremendous power over. And, I do a lot of divorce coaching for people all over the country, and people ask questions, should I do this or that? And like if I had to sort of encapsulate, the main thing is like, the golden rule, right? So like treat your spouse the way you'd want your spouse to treat you, and think about how you would also react. Always put the shoe on the other foot. And that's sort of a, broad brush statement on how to exit kindly or with dignity. But there's a lot of things that come up over and over, such as, if you're dating somebody, should you tell just as about as you're about to get divorced? I would say cold turkey on the new partner until you end this relationship, because it's not going to do anything good for your divorce. And I get that question so often. It's kind of unbelievable. But, there's my answer. So I just saved you a phone call. Like cold turkey, the new person until you have finished this one. It's not going to go well otherwise. And also remember, how you act through and beyond the process is going to create not just a legacy for your story, but it's going to inform if you have kids, your children's narrative of what their life is, and who they are. So, I talk about the positive divorce movement a lot. If you go to my webpage, it says like, join the positive divorce movement. I'm not saying that divorce is this great, wonderful thing and anybody wants it. Certainly not. But all I'm saying is that when we have something that, nearly half of everyone winds up getting divorced or has someone close to them getting divorced, we really need to let the dissolution process evolve into something that is seen at least as neutral, rather than being this horrible, shameful occurrence that we carry with us. Like our homes are not broken. I get frustrated sometimes when, a judge says, you don't want this child ping-ponging between houses. And I would say, well, Your Honor, I'd prefer to frame this as flowing between houses, because, it's not the transition that harms the child, it's the conflict.
You put such a negative story on this thing that happens to nearly 50% of all couples. Why not do it skillfully? And why not have it be a positive story in the story of your life?
Exactly.
I think that's a good place to wind down.
Oh, well, thanks so much for having me on. I hope it was informative.
This conversation with Gabrielle Hartley, author of Better Apart, was recorded on May 22nd, 2020. Healing Together is produced by Healthenly. Our theme song, Ramble, is composed and performed by Ed Morneau.